petty. I will put a book down for any reason. Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Hannah if you're new here. In today's video, we're getting petty. I am talking about all of the books that I did not finish or I gave up on in 2023, but this is the second half of the year. So I did a video like this in the summer where I talked about the first 6 months of the year and all of the books I did not finish. I will link that somewhere for you to go and watch. And this is the second half of the year. From July to December, all of the books that I gave up on for stupid reasons, for valid reasons, and just because. Let's get into it. This is listed in the order in which I gave up. The first series we're going to talk about is the Vows of Honor series by Mercedes Lackey. And this is at a time where I was slowly losing faith in this author as I read more and more into her world, and specifically the Vows of Honor series by this author was incredibly triggering. There was so much sexual assault, and it really had weird things to say about gender and femininity and in a not good way, and in a turfy type of way. And I was just like, no, I think I've tried one more book by this author and also gave that one up. So I think of the Mercedes Lackey books I read, I'm appreciative of what they did for me at the time, but this is an author that I'm no longer going to support. I actually read the entirety of the first book, but I just couldn't. I can't continue or support this author in the future. I read 65% of The Ruin of Kings by Jen Lyons, and I was incredibly bored. This is a book that you would think would tick all of my boxes. Epic fantasy, it's dual point of view, dual timeline, and it just incredible. There was only one timeline I cared about, and at the 65% mark, I stopped caring about that timeline at all. And I just couldn't continue, and I feel terrible about this one. This is one that I had on my list for so long to read, and it just really didn't work for me. And I'm so glad so many people disagree and like this book, but it just bored me to tears. Untouchable by Talia Hibbert. This is the first Talia Hibbert that I couldn't finish. This is a boss employee nanny romance, and I could not stand our main character. Our main character, Hannah, just was not for me. I'm trying to be nice, but like I couldn't stand her. I didn't like her as a character when she was a side character in other books in this series, and I just couldn't stand her as the main character. And I think I got 25% into this one, and I just couldn't do it. I got 20% into A Crown of Ivy and Glass by Claire Legrand. This is the Claire Legrand's adult debut, and it read like a young adult in terms of the writing. And this is what I wrote for my note. I was here for the disability representation. Great disability representation. But I couldn't stand the main character and could just tell this romance was not going to be executed well for my personal taste. I could just tell from the moment these two characters met that how this romance was going to play out wasn't going to work for me. I just knew, so I gave up on it. Ooh, this one, a little bit of tea, a little bit of shade. The 12 Kings of Sherai by Bradley P. Boileau? I think it's French. I've got too much of a stuffy nose to pronounce it correctly. I read 30 pages of this. And this is an epic fantasy series, and the main female character was so sexist and had so much internalized misogyny, and she was so, I'm not like other girls. It bothered me like crazy. The opening of this book is a bloody fight scene, which I didn't have a problem with, but then it immediately goes into her having sex with someone. And then she finishes that, and then she goes to talk to her guy best friend who she's in love with, and she sees him talking to two women and calls them whores in her head and is super jealous. but she has never admitted her feelings to her best friend. So I think she's really unjustified in her judgment of who he's just talking to. So this was just not going to be a main character for me and not an author for me. Another book I only got 30 pages in was The Once and Future King by T.H. White. Now this is a Arthurian retelling, and first of all, it's super weirdly written with anachronisms all over the place. But there were, in those 30 pages, 3 uses of racist language. And 3 is 3 times too many. And this is also written in like an absurdist humor type of way, and I just don't think absurdist humor is for me. So that is just too many strikes against this book for me to enjoy it and continue. Ugh. Twisted Games by Anna Huang. I got 7% into this. This is a contemporary bodyguard princess romance, and I just couldn't get into it. Like, I found myself zoning out and not paying any attention, even though I was reading. Like, it just didn't do anything for me. I know this author is pretty successful and pretty popular, so, you know, kudos, but just couldn't get into it. Another author that I think I tried and it's not for me is H.M. Long. I read 2 books back to back by this author, Hall of Smoke and Dark Water Daughter. I got like 22% into each of these books, and her writing drives me up a wall. I was so confused by what was going on. Even just like her explaining the setting, the surrounding, what's happening, I like couldn't follow what she was talking about. Like, it was just very convoluted and for no reason. And the plots and characters weren't interesting enough to keep me pushing through, if that makes sense. So I just think this is an author that's not for me. And again, nothing but the best for her, and I hope she finds her audience. And I think she has found people who do really appreciate her. It's just not for me. Oh yeah, An Accident of Stars by Foz Meadows. This was on my list for a really long time to read. I thought this was like a polyamorous like portal fantasy where I was like, oh, sign me up. But the first chapter had so much sexual harassment and the sexual harassment in here was extremely vulgar and, you know, violent, even though it was not necessarily physical. The way that the characters, it's a school setting, okay? This girl is in school and being harassed, and she like claps back and gets in trouble for it. And I'm just like, you know what? I don't want to read that. And it was also YA when I thought it was an adult novel, and I'm just kind of over young adult at this point in my life. Or at least young adult has to grab me in a certain way very, very quickly in the book for me to continue. And this just wasn't one of them. It was just very off-putting. And again, I hope this author has great success in their career, but I just can't do it. Ooh, Gray Hair Don't Care by Karen Booth is a contemporary romance about 2 older protagonists. I'm super excited to read this. And this is kind of a second chance romance where these characters previously like had a hookup, and then he like left her in the middle of the night, and them like meeting again and having to work together. And one, I was bored. It took a long time for us to get to the present relationship. There's mostly flashbacks in the first 30% of the novel. And honestly, I didn't think these 2 deserved to be together. I think Leah, the main female protagonist, was incredible and really cool and very successful and awesome. But the guy was kind of a piece of crap. And I was like, the way he left you was super shitty. And I don't think he deserves a second chance. That's why second chance for me is very hard to pull off for my personal taste, because I'm maybe a little harsh on certain individuals and like previous behaviors. Like, there are certain types of behaviors that I don't think deserve redemption. I'm good. I don't need to see these 2 get together because I really don't like him. This next one hurts a little bit and I feel terrible, but I read 80%, 80% of Phantom and Rook. And this is a fated mate's second chance romance, but with amnesia. But it's also like an urban fantasy. So a couple things here. I don't particularly enjoy urban fantasy as a subgenre. So I was already hesitant to pick it up for that. Fated mates, I dislike as a trope in general. You have to really, really convince me that these two belong together. I feel like fated, destined to be together type tropes are crutches. Like, oh, well, we don't need to do chemistry and romance development because they belong together. So it often doesn't work for me. Mostly why I stopped reading, because I just couldn't buy the relationship and I wasn't enjoying the plot. I will say this does have a great found family. This has a great queer cast. The main couple is queer men, queer side characters, queer everybody, which is great. Queer normative world, and I really applaud that. It's just, this was gonna be a hard sell for me, and it just didn't quite work, for my opinion and my personal reading taste. I'm sorry. It just, this was a friend recommendation, so I feel extra bad for not liking it. Oh yeah, and then I read 15% of Wuthering Heights. I was really in the mood for classics, actually, at a time in the year. And this is a reread for me. I read Wuthering Heights back in high school. And I started reading it again, and I was like, oh yeah, these characters are all terrible. Like, genuinely terrible. And the whole plot of the book is characters torturing each other psychologically for revenge because they couldn't be together. So I was like, oh yeah, this book is actually terrible. Like, the characters are horrible. I don't want to subject myself to that again. I already read it once. I'm done. Almost done. Solomon's Crown by Natasha Siegel. This was pitched to me as a historical romance, and this is dual perspective of two kings, famous kings from the Middle Ages, and pits them as a romance with each other. And I was like, ooh, a queer spin on historical figures. I'm sign me up. But this is much more historical than it is romance, if that makes sense. It's much more like literary historical fiction than it is romance. And I'm not the biggest fiction, like just straight fiction or historical fiction reader. So this was just no for me. I got 5% in. I was like, nah. God Killer. Oof. This, I got 30% in. I've talked about this book recently. This was an anticipated release for me. And I really didn't like it. It's because the way this book was pitched to me is not exactly what this book is. This is about, so the pitch is, this is about a main character who kills gods for a living because gods are outlawed. And I was like, ooh, interesting. Sign me up. But this is also 4 perspectives, and the synopsis doesn't talk about those other perspectives at all. It just talks about the one main character. And I was not only caught off guard by that, but I was bored by these other 3 perspectives, and I was bored by the perspective of the God Killer. And I was just not impressed, and I was caught off guard and just could tell it wasn't gonna be for me. Again, nothing against the author. I hope she has lots of success, but I just was bored, and that's okay. Ooh, a nonfiction was The Dark Queens, which it was a nonfiction about 2 queens from the Dark Ages, which is a period of history that I feel like I'm not super familiar with, and I love reading nonfiction about historical women that have been kind of either forgotten to time or only told from the men's perspective in their lives. So this was right up my alley. And I got 10% in, and I wasn't clicking with the writing of this book. It's very storyteller-esque. It's written as if it was fiction. a little bit. And that's kind of not what I prefer when it comes to nonfiction. And I also just like, I've been struggling with nonfiction this year, being in the mood for it, and more specifically, not being in the mood for it. So this one was just like like I'm still interested in the topic, but like maybe the format wasn't it for me. I was reading it physically, maybe the audiobook would work for me, but just something wasn't clicking for me and I wasn't feeling nonfiction. So I moved on. The last book we're gonna be talking about is probably the pettiest reason I decided to put down a book. The Fiance farce. This is the second book by the author that I have attempted and didn't finish. I decided to give this author a second chance because she's writing a lot of sapphic rom-coms and like I want to support her, but something about her writing didn't work for me in the first book I tried by this author. It was like the pop culture references and just that didn't work for me. So I was like, oh my gosh, look at this cover. To me, this looked like a historical romance. I don't know why I got this in my head, but for some reason I was like, this is a historical. Maybe I'll like it better because then there won't be pop culture references. Me being a complete doo-doo head, I didn't read the synopsis of this, where it's very obviously a contemporary romance, where it's literally a fake dating scheme between like an Instagram model and this bookshop worker. And I'm like, so it's completely on me. But I started reading it and I was like, this isn't a historical. They're at like a wedding and talking about Instagram. And then I saw a review that was like, oh, I loved all the Taylor Swift references in here. And I'm like, that is something I hated from the first book I tried by this author. I hated the references to like pop culture. So I'm just like, I couldn't even finish the first chapter. So like, take what I say with a grain of salt. For the most part, these books were not bad. This list of like 17 books. They weren't bad. They just weren't for me, and I'm a picky girl. And sometimes I'm just not in the mood for things. And sometimes I'm petty. Those are the 17 books I did not finish or gave up on in the latter half of 2023. Should I give any of these books a second chance? Also, if you've watched the first part of this video, or the first, 6 months of the year, should I try any of those books again? I would love to maybe do a follow-up and try maybe 2 or 3 of these and try to push through and give them a second chance. But you let me know what you think in the comments down below. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in another video of mine very soon. Bye.